Hey guys, I'm making this quick tutorial um, just so you can see the next step in what else you can do with Pixlr. So in Pixlr, it's not just a composite image generator, it's also a photo editing software. And you could use either Pixlr X or Pixlr E. The Pixlr E has a few more features in it that could be fun to play with, but Pixlr X is a little more self-explanatory, so that's why I've been using that one with you guys. For this project, you will need to take an image that you've already uploaded, okay? An image that's on your computer. So if you have something on your phone you want to edit, or you have something, that you already took a photo for this class that you want to edit, get it onto your Chromebook so that it's there in your memory. And then you're going to go to Open Image, okay? So you're not going to go to Create New or anything like that. You're going to go to Open Image first. And then you're going to find a photo that you want to edit. So I'm going to take this one. That's a picture I took at Sandy Hook like a couple of, back in November. And what you can do with this is you can start to edit certain features of it, okay? For example, if you go to this right here, which is called the Adjust and Filter, this is one of the main ones that I tend to play with when I do photography. I actually kind of like the way the color on this photo looks for my aesthetic, but everybody's aesthetic is slightly different. So here's a few things you can do with it. If you go to the color, you can change the vibrance setting. And what vibrance is if you remember back to the podcast we listened to about Isaac Newton and the colors of the rainbow and how like they change, like the energy level in each color allows us to see it. If you remember, the blues have the highest amount of energy, the reds have a lower amount, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So when we do this, basically what vibrance is how much energy does each color spectrum get, okay? Or really the whole photo, but by taking the vibrance down, you effectively take out the energy that each color has. So the first thing to go, if you notice, was the more reds and yellows, and then some of the oranges, then green, and then blue. If you look, blue is the last one to leave because it inherently has the most energy on its wavelength, and that's why we can see it like that. The other thing you could do, so if you had a photo that was just too colorful, you could try doing this to see if that balances it for you. If you go the other way, it just makes everything pop and saturate. Not saturate, that's the wrong word. It just gives it more strength, okay? So that's what vibrance is. Saturation is the actual strength of the color. So for example, if I go to black and white is essentially just the absence of saturation in color. So let me just show you what this does. If I click on that, just watch what this slider does. It goes to 0, okay, or negative 100 in this case. That's because black and white photos are simply the absence of saturation in color. All right, the color pigments have no strength to them. So if you have something that you feel is, a bit dull and you want it to have more color, you want it to have a little more pop, you could do something like that. If you want it to have a little less color, if for some reason, like sometimes our iPhones have an automatic filter and add a lot of color into some photos anyways. If you wanted to take that down and tone it down a bit, you could do that. Or if you wanted to take a color photo and make it black and white, you would do that. Okay. So that's that. Temperature is more about the reflection of light and how it's seen at different places in relation to the sun's angle. For example, if you go to the Caribbean or you go some warm tropic location, you'll notice that things look, just going to close that, things look a little more like this, okay? And this also happens during a phenomenon called golden hour, all right? Golden hour is when the sun is setting and it's at an angle that creates this golden hue of light, all right? So it's really beautiful, and many wedding photographers and, people who do portraits try to get their subjects out at that time because it just looks so nice. But this is why it's called temperature. So this is what you would see in a warmer climate, and this is what you would see in a colder climate, okay? So that's just something you could play with. Okay, so that's temperature. Tint is these are just kind of fun tools that you could play with, and it just kind of strengthens one spectrum of the light. So you either have your more greens and yellows and greens, or you have your more purples, reds, and blues. Okay, so just these are fun things to play with. I, as a photographer, don't really use them much unless I'm, I use like this one, for example, the hue. That's something you might use. I use something like this for a person's cover art for an album they did, just because it's kind of funky and, you know, adds these different spectrums, kind of flips the colors if you think about it. So now this is blue and this one's the red that you saw on the stand. So it just kind of, you know, gives you a different spectrum to play with. So these are fun. All right, so those are your color editors. And remember, you could always just use black and white. You can compare them by holding this down. It lets you see the difference between the two things you've chosen. You could go to pop, and that just kind of, it's an auto setting pretty much with like a little more vibrance and a little more saturation. And that's your auto fix. And that puts it at a more neutral place. I'm going to just reset everything. All right, so the next thing, and the thing that I use the most, is the light settings. Now, the light settings allow you to correct any mistakes that you as the photographer made when you took the photo. So, for example, if my ISO setting was too high. Now, if you remember back to when we learned about photography, the ISO is how sensitive the sensor in the back of the camera is, okay? So the sensitivity to it, if I set it so it's very sensitive, and I didn't really need that, say I took a photo that was 800 ISO on a sunny day, my photo will look something like this, kind of washed out, you know, maybe even more than that, kind of washed out and just really too bright. I can use the settings on here, such as the brightness, to bring it back to a more realistic image. So not all of your photos that you took with, you know, improper settings are really, you know, worthy of the bin. You could still save some of them. So that's what I would use here. The same thing if my ISO was too low, if I took it at 800 and I really needed it more at like 16 or 3200, I could, you know, take this and brighten it up. All right, so my photo would look like this if I took it at too low of an ISO, and I could use the brightness to correct that mistake at the camera, okay? The other one is exposure. Now, if you remember what exposure is related to the shutter speed on a camera. So when a camera, when we take the image, we hear the shutter open and close. The speed tells you how much light is allowed to go to the back. And if you remember, when somebody's running, we need a faster shutter speed because we don't want blur, right? But when you have a faster shutter speed, you have a darker image. So something like that might look like this. It might be a little bit darker because we didn't want the blur. This is where we can come and adjust the exposure level to bring it back up. And then that image that was a little dark because of the shutter, but at least wasn't blurry, now we can boost this up and then make it look better, okay? In the other way, if you took too long of an exposure, say you know, had I don't know, exposure time of, you know, a third of a second instead of, you know, a 400th of a second, which is what you actually needed, you might have an image like this, okay? This is an example of what something looks like when the shutter speed is open for way too long. You can use this slider to try to correct that mistake. And it won't work every time, but you can save a lot of photos by using just these two. These are the two that I use the most. The rest of them allow you, you know, if you had a photo that was overexposed, you could use some of the contrast to correct some of that so you could see more details. You could use the black points to, again, either see more details, or if it's too dark, you could lower it to allow you to see the photo a little bit better. Other things, the white balance, again, that just kind of brings things up, you know, lightens it up a little bit, or lowers it if it's too exposed. I don't use that one too much. All right, so the next thing that I have here is the highlight and shadows. I don't really use them that much, but the shadows they give you a little more detail. So if you had, say, somebody with like a you know, I don't know, some like really intricate hair, and you wanted to get the texture of that for some reason, that might be a time that you would use this. Or in this case with this grass, you know, if I really wanted the details of, you know, just how textured and, you know, interesting nature is, I might do something like that, like bring the shadows down so I can really see the details in there. Okay. And all of these are just tools to make the image look the way you want it to look. Okay. So if you make a mistake at the camera, you can correct a lot of mistakes using this kind of software. Okay. Other things that you have in here include sharpen, which if your image is a little bit blurry, it'll help to just kind of clean it up. Clarity does the same thing. Smooth, blur, these are all like dealing with the pixels and how they relate to each other. So just smoothing them out. I don't know if you'll see much on this, but if you look carefully, when I moved it all the way up, kind of gave everything like a little more of a smudged look to it. So, you know, you have a choice to play with these kind of things. This is blur. And I guess this would be good if you were making, say, a dream sequence or something like that, and you were taking some stills. There could be a good point in using this, but or if you had to blur something out in a composite image, that this is where you would go ahead and edit it. But yeah, these are just, you know, a few more tools in your toolbox that you can use. This is effects, and this is just like your Instagram filters. You have, you know, a filter here, and then you can apply it. It's as if somebody went into those color tools, the adjustments that I just talked about, and just made some presets. So that's what this is, and you can use the slider to adjust how much of that effect you want to apply to your image. Okay, so there's a ton of those if you want to just play with that. Then you have this fun tool, and I believe I showed you this when we were doing our composites, which is to enlarge, to shrink, and to liquefy. Okay, so if I click on something here, I want to make that a little bit bigger. You can see that that's considerably bigger than it was before. If I wanted to swirl it, liquefy it, I could do that. Okay, so you could adjust the size and the strength and the density there. Okay, one last tool that I'm going to show you is the retouching tool. And what this does is it allows you to repair things. Now on this image, it might be hard for me to repair anything. Maybe I'll try to, I don't know, take out a cloud up there. So I can take a patch. And what it'll do is it takes kind of like a sample of everything around it and tries to blend that in. So I'll show you. Let's see what it does. Yeah, it didn't really do much because the clouds are so, it took kind of the rough edge. See that rough edge on that cloud? Now it's just more of a smooth blended edge. So what this does for us with, this works better in portrait, or if I had something I wanted to take out, say I wanted to take out that swirl that I just made. It's not perfect, but it's mostly gone now. And I could, you know, go back and try to make it a little more finite by making this smaller and making a couple of different patches over it. But what this does for us is that if you take a portrait of somebody and they have a blemish, you know, a pimple or a scratch or something like that that you want to take out, you can do that very easily with this tool. And it'll take a sample of the skin around it to get that. The other thing you could do is a clone stamp. So if I wanted to clone this, it'll say source. I'll click on this. Okay, now it says paint. So if I wanted to paint more grass in the sky, I could sample that anywhere I want. All right, so these are just more fun tools. Hopefully you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you soon.